The dream. It was clearer than a memory. And I heard the sound of thundering hooves, splintering shields and ringing swords. And I placed my heir upon the Iron Throne. And all the dragons roared as one.
I consider the matter urgent. That of your succession.
Well, who else would have a claim?
The firstborn child.
Rhaenyra. No queen has ever sat the Iron Throne.
The king has an heir, Daemon Targaryen.
I will not be made to choose between my brother and my daughter.
Where is duty? Where is sacrifice? Now they see you as you are.
Hello, and welcome back to Bastards and Broken Things. Yes, it's been a long time since we said that. Yeah. Remember that? That's what we're called. A fan critical podcast covering the thing that we began our podcasting adventure with all those years ago. Yes, we are back talking about Game of Thrones, but this time it is a prequel series coming out next week called House of the Dragon. Ooh. Okay, so yeah, be excited.
And it's all about the Baratheons.
In a way, Gareth, there are Baratheons involved. Yeah, so I'm welcomed, as you can hear there, welcomed by my fellow Lord and Lazy, Gaz of House Evans and Lucy of House Baron.
Nice.
All right.
How you doing?
Yeah, you like that?
Alex of House Leonard. That's good.
Yeah, I actually think our names lend themselves quite well to sound like actual houses in Westeros.
I mean, Baron is very
regal.
But you can't be Baron, can you?
I'm a lady.
Baron.
I'm
Baron.
That's
a
true.
Marquess or a Duchess.
Well, I think they work very well. I will say that sadly, Lady Emma and Bronze John, as I'm calling him, are still travelling up the King's Road. So hopefully they will be here for the first review of the season. But sadly, they, one of their carriages lost a little wheel. The horses, just couldn't get here in time. They didn't invest in their horses. Yeah,
they're
so
busy
their whole
eating
litter.
their horse now because that's the sort of world this is where
harsh,
needs
brutal.
must.
They should upgrade to dragons like we have.
Well,
that's true.
In a way, they bloody well should. What side of this civil war are they going to fall on? Anyway, right, how are we doing? Anyway, just out of curiosity, Lucy, you all right?
Hot.
You've been ill the last few
Yeah,
times.
I have. I'm always
You're hot?
It's really hot here in England.
Bloody hell. We always talk about the weather.
Yeah, we are English. Like, that is part of our national psyche to talk about the weather. But it's, extremely hot. Woke up about 7. My phone said it was already 26 degrees. So, not so pleasant.
Well, guess what, Lucy? Me and Gareth have been getting in the mood for the House of Dragons by playing Dungeons and Dragons this morning, didn't we, Gareth? Wasn't that fun?
We did, yeah, we did. I'll tell you what,
Bloody
it's
lovely.
funny, just going back to the weather, right?
Always.
Len and I played football yesterday, soccer. I heard Len having a little chat with the referee at one point, and he was like, I'm fucking roasting here, bro. I was like, all right, first of all, don't talk to the referee like that. That's bizarre. But the ref
was asking me questions.
The ref was like, come on, mate, it's 12 degrees. And it literally was.
Yeah.
And we're struggling in that heat. So good job we're not back at home at the moment. Instead we're here, staying in the shade, playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Dungeons and Dragons was good. We actually played a Rick and Morty version of Dungeons and Dragons, so it was very silly.
Gosh.
And there was a dragon involved.
You killed it, didn't you?
I did. I bloody stabbed it in the head, didn't I, Gareth? And we won the day. Bloody lovely.
Well done.
Anyway, let's talk about the show, shall we? Because we are going to be covering this weekly. We'll talk about how we're covering it at the end of the episode. But it's been a while. I feel like the last time we were all on a Game of Thrones podcast was the finale, obviously, of Game of Thrones, and the sadness at how terribly it ended. And I think that anyone who's listened to our Game of Thrones coverage in the past will know how much we care about the source material and how much we adored the show up to about the final 3 episodes of the final season. Not to say that there weren't a lot of issues, that we could see it sort of unraveling, as it got towards the finish line. And you can go back and you can listen to those drunken and hilarious podcasts. I do implore that you do that because some of them are genuinely hilarious. And we love talking about Game of Thrones because, like I said, we're passionate about the world. We're passionate about this universe that GRRM has created. So, guys, are you excited to be back talking about? Do you think enough time has passed, is what I'm saying, that now you can visit Westeros again with high expectations? What do you think?
Enough time has passed, but I also think I will literally never forget how disappointed I was, and I will sometimes just like sit up in bed and be like, what was the point of making Jon there to Targaryen and Stark? And then he just goes off the wall. Like, it just, these things just come back. Like,
what I will say is, Lucy, just to sorry to interrupt, there are spoilers in this podcast for the end of the Game of Thrones.
Why would you be watching House of the Dragon if you haven't watched Game of Thrones?
I know.
Spoiler warning, everyone.
I know, Lucy. I'm sorry.
I kind of hadn't really thought about this show because, lots going on. And then, obviously we knew we were doing the podcast on it, so I did watch some of the trailers again. And yeah, I could feel that sort of like a little tingle of like, ooh, we're back here in Westeros, trying to just ignore everything else that happened. I think I'm ready. I'm ready to be hurt again. I'm ready.
I think you won't be hurt this time, Lucy. I think this show is going to have we'll talk about it in a bit more detail, the best parts of what makes Game of Thrones.
Dragons.
And Gaz, are you... Well, no, I actually think the dragons are some of the weakest parts of Game of Thrones, although the coolest moments, I think overall, the real interesting stuff is the politics, and just, that's going to be really fascinating. But Gaz, are you excited to go back to Westeros? Has it been enough time for you?
It has been enough time. And plus, everyone's into politics now, aren't they? It's
yeah, big time.
But I am excited. I loved Game of Thrones so much. Like, I mean, until the wheels fell off. But at the time, it was just easily my favourite show probably ever.
My bestest show.
My bestest show. My all-time bestest show, and I loved it. And like, I fell in love with the books, and read all of them through twice, and I've read a lot of the other stuff, the side kind of stories,
the expanded universe stuff,
the expanded universe stuff, and it's something that I feel like I know and I care about. And I tell you what, I can't wait to talk about something that I know and care about, rather than fucking more MCU nonsense. Thank you.
Yeah. I think it's nice that we can go back to our roots, and like, I know, like, even though it's like there's a little bit of, especially when the show was being produced and we knew it's been coming for the last 2 years, not to mention we know of the failed Game of Thrones project, that they spent $30 million on the pilot for The Long Night, which was the set 10,000 years before the events of Game of Thrones, and was how the White Walkers attacked the first time. Not to mention how it just feels like there was so much apathy towards it. Like, I felt apathetic towards the show already because I was just so scorned by what happened. But then when I've been like reading Fire and Blood and rereading some Game of Thrones excerpts and watching some trailers, and I'm like, okay, I'm actually happy that now as a podcast we have something to discuss that we are kind of experts in. I would say we know what we're talking about, but I would also say that it's just something that I know that we've had some of our funniest times discussing. Like, I think back to those Game of Thrones podcasts, and I listen to them every now and then just to see how far we've come in terms of production value and whatnot, but also just to see the just unfiltered nonsense, but also sense that we used to chat to each other. It's quite fun.
Anybody who goes back and listens to them, just do be aware that production values are different.
Minimal.
It was a different time.
They are different. They were, but what I will say is having a lot of us in the same room, having some beers, talking about Game of Thrones, and just theory chat was just some of the craziest stuff we've ever done. But this series, right, is a prequel. So we're talking 200 years before the events of Game of Thrones, at the height of the Targaryen rule, essentially, in Westeros. So the conquest has happened with Aegon, the Conqueror, and then about 100 years after that, 120 years or so, we are at the events of where this show is taking up. So this is based on a book, Fire and Blood, which was released, and this is the thing that we can talk about now, which is quite frustrating. This book was released instead of, Winds of Winter, the 6th installment of Game of Thrones, which we are still waiting for, right, team? It's fucking insane.
It's never going to come. It's never going to come.
It's like spring. It'll never come. We're just stuck in this fucking winter that'll never end.
I remember in like 2013 being like, there's a chance it's not going to come out even next year.
Yeah.
10 years down the line.
Yeah.
That's mad.
It's fucking... I can't get my head around it. So obviously Game of Thrones is finished, but there's still 2 books to come out. And imagine...
It's not happening.
I know those books, if they ever do come out, are going to be fucking amazing. I know they're going to be good. Like, I just know it. Like, all the extra detail that wasn't in the show we're going to get, and it's going to be delicious.
Yeah.
But
and it's going to be different.
Pray.
It's going to be different.
Oh yeah, massively. He's even said that. George has even said that the ending is essentially, they had the bullet points, but all of the extra characters that they just fucking wrapped up. He said he would never have done it the way they did it. You know what I mean?
It's going to work in
And
the book.
we'll
Like,
come
it
on to
doesn't
George.
work in the show, but the end result, it could make sense if we had any there was any logic behind it. Whereas in the show, they
Context.
just went, well, we've just got to end it. But yeah, I don't think that we're ever going to get the books personally, because why haven't we got them now?
We'll talk about George now. Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about George now because this is based on Fire and Blood, which is it's an interesting read. I just actually finished it, and I was talking about this to Gareth off mic, and I was like, it's so. And Gareth's read a bit of it as well, but it's so inside. Lucy, have you read it, by the way?
I've not. No.
Fire and Blood.
I think I just had a veto on all Game of Thrones stuff after the show ended.
So it's very encyclopedic. It's a maester recounting basically the Targaryen history since conquest up to, almost the events of the demise of the Mad King. So essentially, it's very factual. There's a lot of information, a fuck ton of information, a fuck ton of people that it's talking about, and you've got to get your head around it. It's like, it took me quite a while to sort of get a basic grasp of everything. And I still, to this day, it's like someone recanting the history of the kings of England.
Yeah, I have actually I've got a book of that, and it is quite complex to be like. Yeah, they've all got similar names.
Yeah, and I think this show, more than Game of Thrones, obviously, because for the first 5 seasons of Game of Thrones, at least, and even a bit of the 6th season, there was so much George material to adapt that it was so perfect that it translated really well. You know what I mean? Whereas I kind of think this show's got a lot of heavy lifting to do, because there's no dialogue in this book, really. There's no sort of, pageantry. There's no sort of, it's very matter of fact. So a lot of these scenes with dialogue between characters is going to have to be completely fabricated, and that to me is worrying. But unlike Game of Thrones, where George has admitted, and it said this like last week, which was quite a big statement. He said he was left out of the loop for the last few seasons of Game of Thrones, and boy, you can fucking see it. He is fully on board with this show and has been a heavy influence on a lot of it, and has given it a singing endorsement about how he pictured it in his mind. So does that fill you with a bit more confidence?
Is it a singing endorsement or a ringing endorsement?
I do think it's ringing.
I've had a whiskey. We will change it to ringing endorsement.
In post.
Thank you. Thank you for pulling me up on that. Thanks.
I
Could let it go, but you had to call me out. So, thanks.
What would
Accuracy
Aemon
is
Targaryen
important.
do?
Yeah.
Oh, what would the Targaryens do?
I think
burn me alive.
My concern, not concern, but if you look back at Game of Thrones, so the first season to like 3 or 4, especially the first season, they weren't afraid to take their time to build the story because there was no assumed knowledge. There were people that had read the books, but most viewers are coming in not knowing anything, and they were given the time, the money, whatever, to build the story, build the characters, so you're eased into it. Now, my concern with this is that because people that are watching it have watched Game of Thrones, you would assume they're just going to be like, you know the deal with Targaryens, you know the deal with dragons, here we go, like straight into it. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I don't want there to sort of sacrifice the plot and character development just because they assume this prior knowledge that we have going into it. Especially if there's no text to say, this is really like the plot rather than just a list of events, you know?
I will say that in comparison to the sort of setup of Game of Thrones, if they have to do this, there's no way they can just throw you in with this, because there are so many factors at play that lead up to this Targaryen civil war and so many characters. This is going to be really confusing. I think they have to nail... I think this is like a 3-season show, it seems to me. And this first season might be the setup. Like, I'm not going to spoil what happens, but, we'll talk about the characters in a minute. But there's like King Viserys the First. And then there's a question about who will be the heir to the Iron Throne. And he has to choose between his daughter and his brother. And then that sort of, over the course of almost 2 decades, until his demise, there's so many interesting, intricate movements of those chess pieces, like we love about Game of Thrones, that completely shape things to come. And the Dance of Dragons, which is the Targaryen civil war. So they have to set up all of these houses, all of these characters, all of these political motivations again. It feels like it's going to be kind of like season 1 of Game of Thrones to me, like just how I've seen in the trailers and what I've read in the book. I mean, I'm not going to spoil anything, by the way. That this, because and they might change stuff. Who knows? But do you guys think they need to spend a whole season like setting up, getting to the brink of war instead of just going straight into it? Do you want it to be like multiple seasons, or do you
it
think
depends
it's
if it's
like
good, like
kind of thing?
You watch the first Game of Thrones and it was obviously excellent, so you're invested, and there is that mass source material behind it, whereas with this it's difficult to say. Like, you could do a good season and have it all not all wrapped up, but progress the plot a lot within one season, but it kind of depends on the plot and what happens and how long they should really take on it. So without knowing anything about it, I can't really say what I think they should do with it.
You can't just launch straight into a civil war like without setting up any kind of care for it for the characters. So there does have to be that building of the characters. One thing that Game of Thrones did really well, and more so actually A Song of Ice and Fire, the books, is that characters wasn't black and white, good and evil. This is like possibly the best thing, or the most kind of significant thing about George R.R. Martin's writing, was that every character had motivations that you understood, whether you agreed with them or you're on their side or not. They were all people who had genuine motivations that went beyond just wanting to take over the world. Like it went beyond that. And I think that's something they're going to have to, I'm really hoping they can do, and that would be a concern of mine as well. One thing that I'm a little bit worried about is that it might be a little more straightforward in terms of who you're supposed to root for and who the villain is supposed to be.
I'll tell you what, that's a really good point, because even reading Fire and Blood, like I told you, it's quite factual, and there's it recounts several different, maesters' interpretations of what was going on, or maybe some gossip that was going on around the time. And what you don't get in that book is character motivation. Do you know what I mean? We don't know
the facts.
It's just kind of the facts with a little bit of a tiny sprinkling of like why this person was doing something, but it's not known, because the beauty of Game of Thrones and the books, A Song of Ice and Fire, is you get the chapters from the character's perspective. You know, even characters that we despise, like Cersei and Jaime at the start, and Tyrion, and we see these characters change. And even though we hate Cersei, when you're reading Feast of Crows and you're in her head, stuff makes sense for her. And they're going to have a huge job on their hands setting up these Targaryens. And the interesting thing is, this is the height of the Targaryen rule. There has never been more diluted Targaryen blood. There are so many fucking Targaryens, whether they're in House Valyrian or they're in House Baratheon or they're in House Targaryen. They've all been wedded off and, incestually married to each other or whatever. And there's just so many claims to power throughout this, like the most there's ever been. You know what I mean? If you think about Game of Thrones, you've got Dany and Viserys the third, and that's it. And then obviously we could talk about fake Aegon in the book context or whatever. But they've got a big job on their hands to set up these characters. Because you're right, if they don't nail the sort of the grey matter, I have a big worry about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a definite challenge.
I worry they're going to rely on the sort of cultural shorthand that we all have for like the Targaryens, like Daenerys, blonde hair, marrying your family, dragons. So that, so that's...
I would have loved it if they really lent into the purple eyes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it would look a bit dumb though, do you
it.
not think? They just look a bit stupid.
Yeah, maybe it would.
But Twilight, when they will have weird yellow eyes, and it's like, this is taking me out of the show.
Point taken, Lucy. All right. Okay,
just saying.
All right. We'll just stick with the silver and blonde hair. Okay, we'll just stick with that. The good news, I think, is that the showrunner is someone that we know very well from Game of Thrones. It's Miguel Sapochnik, who did... do you want to guess what episodes of Game of Thrones he directed?
I feel like I know. Isn't it The Long Night?
Okay, well, he did The Long Night. He did that one. You want to throw one out there, Gareth? So The Long Night is episode 3, season 8, where, the big battle at Winterfell.
Oh, shit, is that The Long Night? That's the one I was thinking of. I couldn't remember what it was called. All right. What's the...
He did some absolute... So he only started directing in, season 5. He did the best episode of season 5.
The one at the wall?
Hard Home. The one where they're trying to get all of the wildlings on the boats, and then the White Walk.
Because the White Walkers are there.
The zombies attack.
That is that's an intense episode.
Oh yeah. What a great episode. He also did the Battle of the Bastards. Fantastic episode.
I was going to guess the Battle of the Bastards.
Coulda, woulda, shoulda.
And some people think an even better episode is the episode that follows that, the finale of season 6, The Winds of Winter, which, has the blowing up of the
Sept of Baelor.
Place in King's Landing, the Sept of
Baelor,
but also has, Jon Snow, King of the North, the reveal of Jon Snow's heritage, all of that stuff.
Oh God, it's so good. Why did it go so bad?
It's so fucking good.
Annoying.
Like that episode, and the music from Ramin Djawadi in that episode. Oh my word, it's unreal. Good news, he's back. He's back, baby.
That is good
Djawadi's
news.
back.
Yeah, so all of that's good. But
he's a showrunner. Sapochnik, I think, knows what's going down, and he's directing the premiere. He's directing 2 other episodes in that season, so you would hope that it's in very good hands. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Who are the writers though?
Well, George is heavily involved. I think he's written 2 episodes, but I don't hold me to that, dear listeners. I'm not 100%, but I think he's written 2 episodes and he's overseen a lot of it because, like we said, there's no actual tangible dialogue that he is, that they can translate of his. So I think he's had to be quite heavily involved.
So one thing I will say is, that's good. That's a good thing if he is involved, but it also means his current or his more recent slagging off of the last few seasons of Game of Thrones and him saying but this one's better. It's because he obviously has a vested interest. Like he wants people to watch it, and I'm caveating all of this with the fact that I'm looking forward to this, and I do think it's going to be good. I'm just not sure that Martin is the most objective view we should be taking on it.
That's true. It's better to have him involved though than D&D making up their own fucking scenes.
Correct.
You know what I mean?
And characters.
Oh my word! And the way that characters die, just ludicrous. Some of the shit. Anyway, I mean, let's put it this way: if Jamie's storyline ends the way it does in the show that it does in the books, I'll be fucking.
There's just no way.
I'll tell you that right now.
Killed by rock.
There's no.
Oh my god! I'm so angry. I'm so angry just thinking about that.
Oh my word! It's absolutely fucking
goes north to help the resistance, and then's like, "Well, I'm going back to Cersei." Why? Yeah, doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense.
Have you seen that? Really, I think it's a fan art drawing, and it's of a pregnant Brienne with a little boy running around. It's a beautiful piece of fan art. Actually, it's very well illustrated, and I just sort of sit there and just my heart just Jesus.
I literally hate that happened. Oh yeah, we are still
scarred.
We're definitely
George,
still scarred.
Please finish the books because we
George is a big listener. Do you remember when George loves us because I think, and this is going to be taken way out of context, I think I once described George as a pig rolling around in shit in one of our previous podcasts. I don't know what the context was.
Yeah, what was the context of that?
So I don't know. It was probably our second ever podcast. And I remember us all being in my little bedroom and we had beers flying around, like not literally flying around, but we were like sloshing ale and whatever around. And I remember just saying the most ludicrous stuff, like there's no consequences to what we say. So George, if you did listen to that, I'm very sorry. I don't mean it. It was in a nice, fun way. And I was a bit sloshed. Okay?
Pigs are one of the most intelligent animals
damn straight
in existence. So...
Damn straight. Here's a question: 100 pigs in a room for. Do you think they will eventually finish Game of Thrones if we gave them typewriters?
It's difficult because of the trotters. I feel like with monkeys, they've got they've got fingers. They've got opposable thumbs.
It was the best of times. It was the blurst of times. God
the blurst of times.
What I will say is it might not be quality, but they would get it finished quicker than George has.
Oh my God. Yeah. You give them, if you promise those pigs slop every, 4 hours a day, I'd say they'd get it done.
And that is the other thing about George sort of criticising the end of Game of Thrones, which we all have, but it's like that is partially because you haven't finished the books, and if they had a proper guide of what to do, maybe it would have been better. Yeah. So maybe you should just keep your mouth shut, George.
We talked about this at the, and this isn't a hate on the Game of Thrones situation because it's coming across that way, but we did talk about this on the finale podcast that we did, and we said how it is D&D's fault, but at the same time, they thought they would have all of the books by this point.
When they started,
So imagine that. Game of Thrones became the biggest show on the planet by a mile. And then they were like, oh, George, you ready for you got that next book for us? He's like, oh, yeah, don't worry. It's a couple of years down the line. And they're like, what the fuck? We need it now. We literally need it now. So they went over his house and got all those bullet points, and the rest is history.
And obviously, he doesn't need to do it for the show. Like, well, you owe it to the show. You have to finish it. But it is a bit like, you can't complain that much about how it ended when you have not ended it yourself.
And
no,
his
I
legacy,
do agree with that.
His legacy, I feel, is a bit tainted. If he never finishes it, people will remember that is how the whole thing ends, and he doesn't want that.
No, I hope not. I was going to say to you guys, my big concern with this show as well was the amount of CGI dragon work that needs to be done. And it is
there's a lot in the trailers.
There's a lot in the trailers.
Oh my word. So
it all looks quite good though. It looks fine to me.
Yeah. And you got to think, when people release trailers, they usually release it with like the visual effects at like 70-80% of their full capacity because they're still touching them up, all those shots, doing the grading. So I do think it's going to be better than what you see in the trailers, but this is the height of the Targaryen rule. There are dragons everywhere. Like the Dance of Dragons, that Civil War is literally about a fight in the sky, you know, multiple battles over the sky with Targaryen on Targaryen dragon fighting. And I am slightly concerned about the fidelity because we heard how much went into the getting Dany's 3 dragons looking amazing. And don't get me wrong, like Field of Fire, that battle and some of the stuff that we see with the dragons is absolutely astonishing. But imagine they've got to do that for like 20 dragons fighting simultaneously at some point.
I think it's also it's the dragons have always looked good. It's the people riding them that makes it look a bit shonky sometimes. And if that's what we're going to be seeing in this, like the dragon riders, that's where they could come unstuck. But I don't know. Like you said, you don't really watch Game of Thrones or whatever for the dragons. It is for the sort of political intrigue. So I'm hoping that even if it is bad, it doesn't look bad to me. I've got no reason to believe it will be, but hopefully the plot will be strong enough to kind of override that.
And I think like when we watch Game of Thrones, the dragons were so mystical. It was like, and for every character, because the dragons have been gone for about 150 years at that point, everyone was like, oh my god, dragons. And that amazement, like not just from us, but it transferred to the characters, you know what I mean? Whereas in this, dragons are commonplace. Like obviously no other house tied to the Targaryens has one unless they are diluted Targaryen blood, but they're everywhere. People see them, you know, all the time. You know, they ride their dragons into battle, to siege castles, to destroy ships, to take land, whatever they need to do, you know. So it's going to be interesting
to the groceries.
Yeah, get the groceries from the supermarket. Good point, Gareth. Pick crops, you know, all that jazz. So here's a question. So we know there's some famous dragons that we've heard mentions of in the books. Obviously, we're not getting Balerion the Dread because he died about 30 years before this happened, and we're not getting some of those other ancient dragons, but we do have ones like Syrax, Arax, and Vagar, which have been mentioned in the other books, and there's a few more that are mentioned. You know, that's what I like about George's work. We've heard about the Dance of Dragons quite a lot, even if you haven't read Fire and Blood. It's referenced quite a few times. What would your guys' dragon be called if you could call it anything that you want?
That is, yeah. Does it need to be sort of Game of Thronesy, like Targaryen-esque name?
Well, I would say you couldn't call it Phil or something, because that'd be a bit mental.
Colin.
Philgar.
And name it after my dad.
I'll start. Mine would be Lensax. How's that?
Lensax.
You know?
And Lensax.
Sounds like an antidepressant.
And my bow.
I'm calling mine and my bow then. And my bow.
Okay.
And my bow.
So Lensax and my bow, and Gaz's is and my sword.
No, mine's Colin after my dad.
Okay, nice. So Colin and my bow and Lensax. What would Emma and John's be called?
John's would be Don't Care.
Emma's
would be...
John's would just be
Don't
Misery.
Yeah.
Miserax.
Miserax is quite cool, actually.
Miserax is cool.
Yeah. I want that.
Miserax. Emma's would be
Spectaculax.
That's very good.
They've got cooler names than we have. That's not
good.
fair.
Well, Spectaculax is also like a magician's assistant.
Or a laxative.
Yeah. Emma just...
Sorry, Emma.
Riding a laxative into battle. So, is what it is. And then John's dragon is like so grumpy, just like fucking... It's got like a permanent bulldog's face.
It can't even be bothered to fly. It's just like, ugh.
Yeah.
No.
What are you doing here? Anyway. Oh, dear. Well, let's just go through the cast, guys, because I'll tell you what, there's some actually some good actors in here. All right, so one of my favourite actors, I will say, and my favourite Doctor Who is Matt Smith.
He's one of your favourite actors.
I think he's for Doctor Who.
Oh,
It's a big
okay.
claim.
I was like,
No, I mean,
what?
you said
No,
one of your favourite actors and your favourite Doctor Who.
Yeah.
No. Okay, let me rephrase that. One of my favourite actors who's ever played Doctor Who. How about that? And probably my favourite Doctor is Matt Smith. He is Daemon Targaryen, who is a huge part of this show. Basically, one of the main antagonists. Got elements in him like some say he's like Maegor the Cruel in terms of some of the stuff that people fear the fact that he might one day rule the Seven Kingdoms. So that's quite interesting. He's going to be a very roguish prince, which I quite like. Do you guys like Matt Smith?
I saw him in a pub in Kentish Town once, and he was wearing a bright pink beanie.
Oh, yeah?
Yep. He held the door open for me to leave, so
lovely.
I think he's great. Makes a good Prince Philip. Probably not my favourite Prince Philip, because my favourite Prince Philip is your man, what's his name? He was in Game of Thrones.
Yep.
Catelyn's brother. What's his name?
Proper
weakling.
Edmure.
Edmure.
Tully.
I'm talking about The Crown.
Yeah, but what?
And he's
the
Prince
actor's
Philip.
Yeah, I know.
Tobias Menzies.
Oh, very good.
He's my favourite
that's his
Prince
name.
Philip. But anyway, yeah, Matt Smith, he's got the look, hasn't he? He is a weird-looking fellow, but he's very distinctive.
Yes, he is.
And he does look like he could
he's
be
got
the product of generations of inbreeding. Like, I'm not being rude, but he's got that kind of...
Fuck me.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a good thing, Matt.
That's why people listen to this podcast. We are not afraid to say it like
The
it is.
hard truths.
All right?
No, but
So,
he's striking
George is
and
like
weird
a pig
looking.
rolling around in his own muck, and Matt Smith is
Gareth, you're allowed to swear.
possibly.
You're allowed to swear, mate.
I'm not
Hey?
saying he is the product. It's just, it's believable that he is the product of generations of inbreeding. He's got that kind of... Whereas, lovely Daenerys, it's just, you don't look like the gene pool's small for you. You know what I mean. Sorry, Matt.
True that. I know what you mean.
He's a good actor. He is a good actor, and I think it's a good choice. They've again sort of like Game of Thrones, maybe not so much, but got actors that are well known without being like stars, and that helps, doesn't it? Because you are seeing the character rather than it's George Clooney, for example.
Yep.
Yeah, Matt Smith's good. Not my favourite Doctor Who of all time.
Who's your favourite Doctor Who of all time?
Who's
That
yours?
goes to Mr. David Tennant. But
Ooh.
I will say,
Yeah, second best one.
I really liked him as Prince Philip. Actually, in the cat, I thought
Very
it was brilliant.
good.
His energy in that role is just so good.
He made him seem like a fun guy.
Yeah,
And a bit of a dick,
Proper fun
bit of a
guy.
bad husband, but I was like, yeah, I get why the Queen would love you. Let's do a Crown podcast.
just
I
a
love
product
the
of
Crown.
his own time, But yeah, he's good. He's good. He's a really good actor. And he should. He'll be perfect for this. Paddy Considine. In it
Love
as
Paddy
well?
Considine.
Yep.
He is a
playing
great actor.
King Viserys the First. So King Viserys is essentially, I think this season will go the way of the whole season will hopefully involve Viserys up until the end, and then he dies. Everyone dies, so there's no spoiler there. Just of an old age situation, and then that's when the question of succession comes into play.
Oh, can we
know
talk
what I
about
mean?
Succession?
Oh, great show.
I forgot to tell you that I'm watching.
What a show.
Oh, you
watched
started
Lucy.
it. Oh, you've watched it all.
I finished it. All done.
So good, isn't
Bloody
it?
brilliant. That's why.
Can't wait till that comes
So
back.
good.
We should do a Succession pod
Yeah,
when it's back.
Yeah.
I told Gaz for ages to watch it, Lucy. He didn't listen.
It's hard
Oh,
when
right.
someone's like,
Oh,
"You'll love it,
yeah,
you'll
fine.
love it." You're like, "Oh, stop putting pressure on me."
I did love it.
So yeah, he's playing King Viserys, Paddy Considine, and I think it's going to be because Viserys is quite like a weak-willed king. Like he's not like he's kind of he has some strong moments.
He's a
but
nice guy.
malleable.
Sounds
Nice
good
guy.
to me.
He's a nice king. He rules for like 40 years. Or is it 30 years? Something along those lines. So he's he's an old hand. Like that's a long time for a king.
He'd be known
You know,
as Viserion the ambivalent.
Viserys
Viserys the
ambivalent.
meat.
Yeah,
Sorry,
and
yeah, he's not a
before him
dragon.
was Yeah. Just add Eon onto everything. Viserion. Yeah, and before him was Jaehaerys, and Jaehaerys ruled for like 60 years or 50 or something. So he was like the absolute peacetime. You know what I mean? So the rule of Viserys is quite peaceful, but there are so many like moving parts behind the scenes, especially with this question of succession, which leads to the civil war. So this is the beginning of the end of the Targaryens, the beginning of the end of the height of the Targaryens, if you get what I mean.
Why is there a
They're
question
never
of
the same after
succession if he has a daughter? Is it just because of sexism?
That's a good question.
Yeah, it's
so
the way of the world.
Oh, it does say that in the trailer.
So
That's stupid. It's not a good excuse.
The way the Targaryens always did succession was by a male heir. So there's a big council that's actually held, I think, during Jaehaerys' reign at Harrenhal, where every single lord of like Westeros goes there, and the king actually doesn't attend, but he says to everyone, because there's a question of succession during his reign about who should be my heir, and all of the lords vote, and they fall down on the fact that it has to be the next male heir available, like whether it's your son or a brother or whatever, before it be a female heir. And the interesting thing here is like Viserys' daughter, Rhaenyra Targaryen, he loves and adores. All right, so he kind of goes against this council that happened like 20 years ago, and sort of proclaims that she's the heir apparent to the throne, and that is where there is going to be the start of these fractures of civil war. So there's going to have to be a bit of setup. You know what I mean? The interesting thing is that they have got two actresses playing Rhaenyra Targaryen, which is good, because it means it's going to show over the course of this season there's going to be several decades at play.
Yeah.
You know, they're going to show her as a young girl when she's very close to her father, and then you're going to start seeing her as a queen, a queen apparent, you know, an heir to being the queen of the Seven Kingdoms, and how she becomes very strong-willed. You know what I mean? And you see these sort of two sides of the Targaryens sort of open up. So that's going to be really interesting. But I think the cast looks really good. I think it's a lot of British actors again, guys. So repping the British squad.
That's what we need.
You know, we're the best.
Yeah,
we're the bloody best.
There's a few like weird accents, I think.
Yep.
Because
you know,
the Targaryens, they are kind of relatively recently foreigners to Westeros, so they haven't got that common tongue accent. And you know, in Game of Thrones, it's basically the accents of the UK, like
North England, South England,
exactly.
Birmingham's not in there, Gareth.
No, we haven't got any Scousers in there either.
No,
that didn't happen in
That'd
Game
be
of
the
Thrones.
phrase. I reckon the Birmingham accent would be the phrase. What do you think?
I think so.
It would,
Sorry,
but-
Birmingham.
Fucking
You've had a lot of
phrase.
good stuff
Jesus
recently,
Christ.
but now you're the phrase.
Now you're
Congrats on the
phrase.
Commonwealth Games, but also you're the phrase.
You are the House Frey.
Yeah. Have you guys got any more thoughts on House of the Dragon that you wanna share to the audience before we let them know how we're going to be covering this new HBO endeavor?
I saw there's someone in the cast called Jason Lannister. That made me laugh. That's my point.
Is that his actual name?
Just the character's
Or is
called
that his
Jason
character
Lannister. I'm like, I know that name.
Yeah,
Jason.
I don't remember hearing
Yeah.
of a Jason Lannister.
Jason
There's
Lannister.
Tyland
Yeah,
Lannister.
not even
That's weird.
Not even with a Y
That's
or
weird.
anything. Jason. It's just Jason.
Jason Lannister and his best mate Gary Targaryen.
No, I mean, I'm looking forward to watching it. I think, I hope it can just like put itself apart from Game of Thrones and stand on its own as something different. But yeah, it looks good to me. I'm looking forward to it.
Gareth?
Yeah, I think like I know it's still a complex web that needs to be woven here, but it should be more straightforward in a way, like in terms of linear elements to it, and
it's more insular looking.
It should be more focused and insular. It's about one family really, which I think will be a good thing for a sort of shorter version of a Game of Thrones series. So
yeah, we're not going across to Essos. I don't think we're going to be going across to like Essos, for example. There are mentions of it, but I think this is going to be Westeros, Dragonstone, maybe some islands just off Westeros, but mainly around King's Landing, and maybe to the Vale a little bit. You know, there's going to be like that. I doubt we're even going to see much of the Northmen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no.
I think this is going to be kind of a southern affair, so it's going to be interesting. Like, there's some really good characters in there. Like, you've got the High Towers are going to be in there. The House Valerion's going to be in there. So it gets really interesting, and seeing how these houses divide themselves up is going to be. I think it's the politics thing that we loved about season 1. Those small political maneuvers. I think they're going to be back, which I'm really looking forward to. So yeah, I think it's just good to have the gang back together, talking about something that we love talking about, having some drinks, having a bit of fun. So the way we're going to do this show,
how are we going to do it?
How are we going to do it? Me and Gareth, every time the episode airs, so quite soon after, within that day, we'll have an instant reaction of just me and Gareth talking about the episode for, say, 20 minutes of just what we think, not too spoiler heavy, not too in depth. It's a literal instant reaction. We've just finished watching the episode, and then we're going to talk about it.
A bit rough around the edges.
And then very rough around the edges. Don't judge us, but we just want to get our thoughts across on the episode. And then about a day or 2 days later, depending on what time zone you're in, so it could be your Tuesday or it could be your Wednesday. US listeners, it will probably be Tuesday. UK will probably be Wednesday, and Australia will definitely be Wednesday. You will have access to our in-depth review, which will feature at least 3 of us every week. Hopefully sometimes 4, and in the rare occasion that we're all available to do it, 5. So that is the way we're going to cover the show. So it's very comprehensive. You'll get an instant take. So if you really need to hear our thoughts straight away, we'll be there. And then we're going to come at you with all the history, how that relates to Game of Thrones, things that we've heard of in the Game of Thrones books about these events. So it's going to be really good. So tune in. Please do subscribe. You can go to patreon.com/fancritical and donate some lovely monies to help us create content like this, covering the shows that you love and we love, because without your guys' support, we wouldn't even bother doing it. So please do, if you can spare any cash on a monthly basis, you will get some added benefits. We were thinking about making the Instant Podcast a Patreon-only exclusive, but then we thought, this is a global show. We want to make it open to everyone, So, but any thoughts, guys?
But join the Patreon anyway,
definitely join the Patreon. That's true. Because we do every Patreon. We love you. And we thank you so much for your donations, and it does not go unnoticed. It really does mean a lot to us, so thank you so much. And that's all, really, guys. I look forward to having you two back on with Grumpy John. What was his little dragon called?
Miserax.
Very good name. And then what the fuck was Emma's called?
Spectaculax.
Spectaculax.
I want to change my dragon's name. I'm going to think of one by the next podcast.
No.
And my bow was just a runaway joke, It was just off the cuff.
Yeah. And my bow axe.
And my bow axe. Yeah. And my bow axe is a bit better.
And my bowian. It's ridiculous. Well, Len's axe isn't changing. He's there. He's also a form of laxative in a way. Len's axe does sound quite laxative.
And the most powerful of them all, Colin.
Fear him, for he is the biggest dragon that's ever existed. Colin the Dread, in a way. So
sort of the opposite of my
guys.
dad, really, isn't it?
Oh.
Very much so. Colin, the loveliest of the dragons. we will be back next week with our instant take and then in-depth review of episode 1 of House of the Dragon. Thank you for returning to Bastards and Broken Things. And don't forget, spread the word. Share it out there. Get people subscribing to either Fan Critical or Bastards and Broken Things. Thank you very much, Lord Evans.
Thank you, Lord.
Thanks, Lady Baron.
Thank you. Thank you, Len. Len.
No worries. And Len
Len of
the Wise.
House Len.
Yeah, so Len of House Len, first of his name. We will catch you next week. See you later, guys. Bye.
Bye.